I hope everybody's having a good spring break. I just wanted to catch up with you and explain to you where we're heading in English 108. So, as you probably know, we're transitioning now from our technical review into our instructions assignment. And our instructions assignment is really about not only just helping a reader accomplish a task, but helping them do it at the highest level of efficacy possible. And so what that means is that usually in the workplace we have something called the standard operating procedure. And those standard operating procedures exist because we want our employees and our coworkers to not just get from point A to point B, but to do it in the most efficient, the safest, the most reliable, most predictable, and most consistent way possible. And so that's sort of the way that I want us to approach this assignment. And so, like I said in a previous email, it's relatively easy to get somebody from point A to point B, but to get them there with as little frustration as possible, eliminating waste, making sure that they're safe, all of those types of things, really requires you to exercise some important technical writing muscle. And the way that I like to talk about writing instructions, really it comes down to three major moves or steps that a writer has to make, and that's outlined in a handout, but I want to just contextualize that a little bit. The three moves are called staging, coaching, and alerting, and I'll give you the Cliff's Notes version of those three things here, and hopefully we'll get a chance to practice those things and observe those things and work with those things to the point where it becomes second nature, that anytime you have to explain a process or a procedure to somebody, you'll have a sort of toolkit to fall back on, which is what this course is all about. My goal, as I've said a million times, is that when you leave this class and you're confronted with a writing situation, you'll be able to quickly assess it and make decisive action. And one of the ways that you can do that is say, okay, here I am guiding someone's action, and I need to remember the three moves that Mike taught me. And so let's go through those really quickly. Staging basically means that you have the right person in the right place with the right materials and the right stuff to succeed. And so we're really setting the stage for the procedure that's about to happen. And so one of the things I want you to really consider is what are the optimal conditions for success for this particular procedure. And so there's any number of things that we can take into account there. Usually you want the reader to have some sense of the procedure that they're about to undertake, why they're doing it, what it will result in, but there are much more sophisticated and nuanced considerations that you also want to make. You want to make sure that you have the right person performing the task, so identifying a level of expertise or knowledge that's necessary to do this thing. Sometimes we also want to notify people if another set of hands is really valuable. A classic example of this is, say you buy a couch from IKEA and you go to home to put it together and you realize, wow, this is really cumbersome and awkward. It'd be really nice if I had known that a second set of hands would have really helped. That's really what I'm talking about when I say you get the right person or right persons. You want to get them in the right place. So that means environmentally, you want to make sure that they're in the right environment, and a lot of that has to do with safety, but some of it also has to do with just creating the best conditions for success. Sometimes we want to have a flat surface available. Sometimes we want to have a soft working area available. Sometimes lighting comes into play, ventilation, any number of things. We want to make sure you have the right person in the right place, and then you also want to make sure that they have the right stuff, and that can mean any number of things. It probably means that they have the right materials. It means that they have the right tools. It means that they have the right equipment. And so you really just want to survey this, what I'm calling the stage, and make sure that the reader knows everything that they need to know before they begin the procedure. So remember, right place, right person, right stuff. And if you can assure those three things, then you're setting up the conditions for success in a favorable way for your reader. The next thing that we want to do is we want to coach the reader. And I think the word coach here is really important because we're not just instructing or directing them. I really want you to think of it as coaching. And if you think about the what it means to coach, it's not just I'm going to tell you to do something, but I'm going to show you the best way to do it. I'm going to show you the most effective way to do it. I'm going to give you insight that I've learned over time. So hopefully I can help you avoid some of the frustrations that I've had. And so when you come at it from that angle and not just, I'm going to give you an enumerated list of steps, but I'm actually going to coach you through the process, I think that alone puts you in a right frame of mind. But there's a number of other things that we can do, and it's relatively difficult to explain those here. So I'll let you consult the handout, but I'll hit some of the key points. And some of this will probably come up when you reflect on your experience using instructions. But one thing that we want to do is we want to make the document easy to read and navigate. So we don't want to overwhelm the reader. You can imagine if you pulled out an instructional document and it was 32 sequential steps, all in a very, very tightly constructed list, that would be overwhelming. It wouldn't be useful in the context of how someone's actually probably going to use that document. So we've talked about this before, but one of the things I want you to consider is your audience and how they're actually going to interact with the document. And so one of the things that we know about instructions, that people, when they're using them, generally go from the task to the instructions, back to the task, back to the instructions. And so we want to facilitate that in the way that we design the document and lay out the document. If we have a 32 item single space list, size 12 font, that's not going to facilitate that back and forth that we're really looking for. The other things that we can do to coach the reader, or we can use images. So, sometimes we're trying to instruct somebody about the orientation of elements, or we're trying to explain to them where to look for something, or sometimes even how to perform a manual action. And sometimes, a picture in that case really is worth quite a few words. Other things that we can do is we can make sure that at the step-by-step level our writing is really crisp and really precise, so we're not leaving things up for interpretation. So we're not saying, tighten that pretty tightly, or, loosen that a little. We're giving, really precise measurements, 3/4 of a turn. We're using a torque wrench or whatever to make sure that we're being hyper-specific. We're going to try to limit each of our steps to just one action, because readers tend to get overwhelmed if you pile actions onto them. So we really want to be mindful of how we're actually spelling out those step-by-step directions. Another thing that I want you to think about is that oftentimes when we're talking about a larger procedure, we're fundamentally talking about larger groups of steps, or what are sometimes called segments. And so when we can segment the process into groups of steps that accomplish something, some common task, we want to do that. We've been talking all semester about breaking our documents up through headings, and segmenting is one way to do that when we talk about instructions. And so, the classic example that I like to use is when you're changing the oil. Instead of just having, again, that 32 item enumerated list, we might think of the sub-steps, the larger sub-steps of changing the oil, something like gathering the materials, preparing the vehicle, jacking and securing the vehicle, draining the old oil, removing the old oil filter, replacing the oil filter, replenishing the oil. Each one of those steps, and we just listed off 6 or 7 of them, obviously is made up of even smaller steps. And so when we can sort of do that and compartmentalize our instructions, again, it makes the document more useful. What it also does is it facilitates somebody's ability to just dive into the document where they need to go. So it gives navigational signposts for the reader, because what we have to understand is that usually, and we said this from the very beginning of the class, a reader doesn't read a document linearly and sequentially. So they don't start in the upper left-hand corner and end in the bottom right-hand corner of the final page. They bounce around and go to the place that solves their problem, and that's true of instructions. I'm sure we can all relate to that. Geez, I know how to get through the first 3 stages of this, but I really just need to know this one detail in the latter part of the process. And generally we want to be able to find that really easily. So segmenting is a skill that I really want you to think about. And again, this is outlined in the handout. But I want you to think about how can I break this larger process up into sub-processes and take those in sort of like bite-sized pieces. So we want to do everything we can in our power to really coach the reader. We want to give indicators of success. So when something we want the reader to know when they've been successful, essentially. So, sometimes we might say you'll hear an audible click when the thing sets, or you'll know it's successful when it has the consistency of X. So we really want to make sure that our reader knows along the way that they're being successful. If you've done it correctly, it'll look like this. And so we want to include those types of moments in our instructions so that our reader feels confident that they can proceed to the next step. So we want to include those indicators of success. But again, what's most important to me is that you really take on that role of coach, and that you think about best practices, and that you think about not just getting somebody through the steps, but doing it in the most frustration-free way possible. So we're eliminating that frustration. We're trying to be user-friendly and reader-centered. And again, the ways that we can do that are that we can include images. We can make the document easy to navigate. So we're thinking about how we're placing stuff on the page. Part of that is also segmenting. We're thinking really carefully about how we write our individual instructions. We're trying to limit it to one action per step. We're trying to avoid jargon. We're trying to be very precise when we talk about how to perform a particular action. So we're making sure that people know what we're talking about when we refer maybe to a specific component or we refer to a specific procedure. So those things are really important. And then after we've set the stage, we've coached the reader, the other thing that we want to be really mindful of, and this is a hallmark of most instructional documents or places where we're guiding action, is we want to make sure that we have the appropriate alerts. And alerts are really places where you can step in and help the reader avoid catastrophe, basically. And the thing that's most important about alerts is that they are timely and they are conspicuous. And what I mean by that is a warning is no good if it happens after the reader's had a chance to make a terrible mistake. So we want to make sure that our warnings come early, and we want to make sure that they stand out on the page. And so usually, it doesn't take a rocket scientist, but we're talking big red font here, skull and crossbones, whatever you want to call it. But we want to make sure that our reader avoids problems. And when I say problems, I don't just mean health and safety problems. I also mean places where they can spoil or foil their procedure, where they can, do something that's just going to result in waste or is going to result in, undue harm to a piece of equipment, etc. And so that's really what I want you to be mindful of. And that's why I've asked that you pick a procedure that you have a level of expertise over, is because it's very hard for you to set the stage comprehensively. It's very hard for you to coach the reader. And it's very hard for you to usefully and conspicuously and alert the reader if you don't know the procedure very well. So it's important for us to be comfortable with the content that we're talking about. And I can't stress how important this particular assignment is. There are very few workplaces that I can think of where the success of the workplace isn't predicated, at least to some degree, on the quality of the procedures that happen within it. And so the ability to write clear and reliable instructions for other people is super duper important. So just to remind you, remember to set the stage, which means right person, right environment, right stuff. I also want you to make sure that you are coaching the reader, not just directing them. And again, think of any coach that you've ever had and the way that they were able to help you by demonstrating in some cases, by providing an analogy in some cases, by explaining things in a way that you can understand in some cases, and then make sure that you're alerting and make sure that those alerts are timely and conspicuous. And I can promise you that if you do those three things thoughtfully, and you really think about those three things through the eyes of your reader, you're going to be in a really good situation. And what that's going to result in is a document that you can then take to an audience, which you're going to have to do as part of week 9, and you're actually going to have somebody test your instructions. And what that's going to look like is you are going to give them all the materials that they need and your instructions, and you're going to ask them to perform that task. And you're going to watch them. And the beauty of watching somebody is that you can see the look of consternation. You can watch them, try to make those discretionary decisions where they're like, geez, I don't know if that's tight enough, or geez, I don't know if that's enough glue, or whatever it is. And then you can go in, sometimes even in real time, and make the adjustments to your document that are really going to help the reader have a much more useful experience. And I can tell you that there's no way to recreate that. You really just need to have a real user, a flesh and blood person, use your documents in order for you to make those types of revisions. And certainly, I think you'll see the value of that. So that's what we're doing with the instructions. I'm going to do my best to work through your technical reviews. You may not get those back, frankly, until the beginning of week number 8. But I promise to provide enough feedback on those that if you are so inclined to revise, you'll have the opportunity to do so, and you'll have plenty of stuff to go on. I just want to make sure that I give those the time that they need, and I'm heading out of town here relatively soon. So if you have any questions or concerns about what's going on, please let me know. But try to pick a procedure about what you're going to write that you have command over, that you can test safely on a fellow human being. So it should be something that is relatively innocuous, but relatively complex too. We're not making peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. We're doing something that requires some level of skill. I gave you a list of procedures that I hope inspire you. And if you have a question about whether or not I think your particular procedure is going to work, all you have to do is shoot me an email, and I'll be happy to give you my 2 cents. But otherwise, I hope you enjoy the rest of your spring break. Thanks.